I'm really happy to be able to introduce my friend Jacqui Maher, who went to Africa and had a great adventure that she told us about. I was in New York last year, and she gave a little version of this talk at a local meetup there, and I liked it so much I asked her to come give it here for us. So Jacqui's a former San Franciscan. She's really glad to be back here, and I'm really glad to have her back here too. So here you go.
Thanks, Josh. Hey everyone, can you hear me okay? Yeah? So as Josh said, they know I'm really nervous about doing this, so they thought, you know.
It's not like that, sorry.
Okay, let's try that again. Hi everyone, as Josh said, my name is Jacqui Maher, and I'm here to talk to you about using Ruby to fight AIDS. I'm going to be talking to you in particular about the awesome work that a group is doing in Malawi. That group is called Baobab Health. They are, as I said, they're based in Malawi. They're a nonprofit that was founded in 2000 by a man named Jerry Douglas. They are funded mostly by the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization. Although they were founded by a person who's originally from Canada, they are mostly made up of Malawian employees. That includes their developers. There might be some confusion over what that name is. I had never really heard the word baobab before. In fact, I had no idea how you pronounce it. Baobab is a tree. It looks like that. It's kind of a strange-looking tree, and it's found throughout Africa and Australia. Local legend says that after the world was created, all the animals were given a tree to plant, and the hyena, being a hyena, planted his upside down, and that's why the baobab looks like that. It kind of looks like the roots are all sticking out. The Baobab Health team actually had several meetings to standardize the pronunciation of it, and so it is pronounced baobab. So, Malawi, Baobab, how did I get involved in this? Well, Baobab actually presented at RailsConf Europe in Berlin in 2007. I wasn't there, but a friend of mine was there, and he knew that I had an interest in epidemiology, of course, programming, and Africa, and so he let me know about this, and I tried to get in touch with them. Right after their presentation, there was a huge interest throughout the Ruby community. Google groups were formed, Facebook groups were formed. People were like, we want to contribute, we want to be part of this. And then there was nothing. And that was a little frustrating, and no one really knew what was going on. You know, these guys were in Malawi, and it didn't seem like, you know, there was any way to contribute. How I ended up contributing was I flew to Africa. I went to Lilongwe, Malawi, which is the capital, and got picked up at the airport, got driven to the office, and that is the entrance to the office. It is the main hospital in Malawi, in Lilongwe, and that is the guard post that I would have to drive past every day. But they have an office set up at the hospital. That's one of my friends from New York who came with me, and one of the developers at Baobab. Even though it is in Malawi and they're pretty remote, they do still have like all the same trade magazines and stuff. So I went there and got to know the guys working there, got to know what they do, and I'm going to go into that. One of the guys who was my main contact was an American named Jeff Rafter, and that's him right there, explaining to me the piece of paper right in front of him. It's a very complicated data model that he was explaining to me, and I'm going to go into that too. But the main focus of what Baobab is working on has to do with AIDS, and you're all familiar with AIDS, of course, but I thought it would be useful to get some numbers up front. So, 6.7 billion people in the world, 33 million people are infected with HIV. There are 2 million AIDS-related deaths every year. Last year there were 2 million, 2.7 million new infections. In Africa, as some of you might be aware, the rate is much higher. There's 800 million people living in sub-Saharan Africa. 25 million of them are infected with HIV or have AIDS. 1.5 million deaths last year. 1.9 million new infections last year. Africa, having 12% of the world's population, has 60% of the people who have AIDS. What does that mean? Well, Africa, post-colonial era, was on the upswing, right? Living standards were improving. They were starting to contribute to the world economy. Life expectancy was getting higher. Then the AIDS epidemic hit. And as you can see from that graph, the life expectancy went from about 60 or so years to, it varies by country, but around 40 years. That lowered life expectancy, which should have been about 62 years, 47 years on average, has led to 12 million children being orphaned by AIDS, setbacks in economic development, social progress. You can't exactly work if you're caring for someone who is sick. You're not going to be going to school if you're sick or you're caring for someone who's sick. So Malawi in particular has been hit pretty hard by this epidemic. But first, where is Malawi? Malawi is in southeastern Africa. It borders Tanzania, Zambia, and Mozambique. Its capital, as I said, is Lilongwe. And that's kind of small. It's kind of small, but you can see where it is on the map. So it's in sub-Saharan Africa, as I already said. The official languages, and this is pretty key, one of them is English, which is great. The other one is Quechua. It's one of the least developed countries, but it's also one of the most densely populated countries. Although it is one of the most least developed countries, according to The Economist, it is the second fastest growing economy in Africa. And it has a multi-party democratic government. Although I've said all of this about Malawi, I think most of you might be most familiar with it because of her and that whole incident that happened with Madonna. But anyway, back to the original topic, AIDS in Malawi. 1 million people of the 14 million people who live there have AIDS. That means 84,000 people die of it every year, 250 new infections daily. 14% of the adults have it, which is a pretty significant number. What does that mean? What is the impact? Well, it's a leading cause of death in adults. The life expectancy in Malawi is 43. 8 people die every hour from AIDS, leaving 500,000 children orphaned. In 2002, I don't know if any of you heard this in the news, Malawi had a pretty significant famine. It was the worst famine that they had had in over 50 years, and the major cause of it was AIDS. Because of the reasons I listed before, you can't go to work, you're not going to be farming, and all of that stuff, and contributing to society if you're sick. And so it's pretty common to see things that we don't really see here in Malawi, like this sign. I went to a park in Lilongwe, and there were all sorts of signs like, stay on the path, do this, do that. And there's this one, AIDS is real. And oh yeah, there's only 280 doctors in Malawi, which means each of those doctors is seeing 3,500 patients for HIV. With those long lines, which are really long, and I have a picture of one of them. People leave or they're never seen by doctors. You have, when they do get up to the front desk, they have a very complicated registration form on paper. It takes about 15 minutes on average for people to fill out. You have people writing down names and dates of birth on pieces of paper. There's incorrect data, you lose paper, and all of that leads to people getting incorrect treatment if they get treated at all. I found this quote here from a doctor who's a district health officer of not the hospital that I was at, but a different hospital. And I thought it really summed up the problem pretty well. It's difficult to meet the needs of patients because we don't have sufficient staff, training, or equipment. Patients have to wait several hours to get their HIV test results. Many leave and have to come back the next day. A few never return. So here's what I'm talking about with the lines. What does that really mean? People die. So, what can be done? Well, you can make the patient intake a lot faster and easier. You can have more accurate data, verifiable data, and you can be able to access it right away. How? Well, in this case at least, you digitize it. And how can you do that? Well, you need hardware, software, network, the whole typical setup, right? But in clinics in sub-Saharan Africa, you can't walk around with like a desktop computer, or MacBooks are very expensive. You need something small, portable, rugged, easy to use, You need software that's intuitive. You need the software to be able to handle data entry, validation, comparison, reporting, network connectivity. This is something I really took for granted before I went to Africa. First time I went to check my email, wow. I had all these grandiose plans of like blogging and all of this stuff from Africa. Didn't happen. Loading google.com took, I don't know, I'd go get a coffee, come back, it would still be loading. Yeah. So network connectivity between the clinics in Malawi usually didn't exist, let alone network connectivity to the internet. Power outages occur regularly, and I should really have put several times per day. So you're going to need some kind of generators, batteries. And finally, you're going to need some collaboration between the clinics and the doctors. You're going to have to get some feedback. If you're developing an application that's going to be used in all these remote areas throughout this region, you're going to have to find out what works, what doesn't work, what do they need, what could be done better. And you're also, beyond all of that, you're going to have some kind of authority in the field. Why would people want to use your application? Like if one of us just made this application and went over to Africa, why would anyone want to use it? Like who are you? So you need to have some kind of trust and respect, which they did through working with the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization, which was a pretty significant effort on Jerry Douglas's part. So that's a big plan. It's expensive, even for our country here, which is pretty rich. Think about what happens when you go to the doctor. It's usually, in my experience at least, it's paper files. Stuff kind of looks like that. So Baobab went in, and this is what they did. Well, first of all, they are saving lives. That is not a dramatic statement. They are actually saving lives by improving the treatment of patients. They're doing this with computerized data entry and retrieval. They've developed portable workstations with touch screens, which I'll get into in a moment. And they have system-based treatment protocols. So someone comes in exhibiting certain symptoms. They punch in the symptoms. The application tells them what kind of drug treatment they should be on, how often they should be seen. So the hardware I already mentioned. The portable tablets. Well, I don't know if any of you remember this. It was kind of a blip during the era of internet in a box and all the kind of stuff that was coming out. But there was this web terminal called the Eye Opener. And I guess the setup was it had like a little button for email, a little button for surfing the web and stuff, and you were supposed to get a subscription and access the internet through there. I can show you a stack of eye-openers at the Baobab offices in Lilongwe. They realized that despite the fact that this internet appliance only had a 56K modem, and by the way, it totally bombs, right, in America and Europe. It wasn't very popular. Despite the fact that it only had a 56K modem, they could hack it. They could add in Ethernet, and other people have. There's a whole underground people who hack this thing. It's pretty cool. But anyway, so they could add Ethernet to it. Not only that, they could add power over Ethernet, and they could add a touch screen, which allows people to carry this tablet around and just input data with their hands. They could also add something to scan barcodes. One thing that the government of Malawi has done to try to facilitate people getting treated easier and faster at clinics is institute a national ID in a health passport. And that national ID is a barcode. So if you plug in a barcode scanner, you're going to be able to just, blip and read in someone's data, and they don't have to stand around waiting while you type in their name. So it's even better. So yes, what Baobab did was they got a bunch of eye-openers. They were actually buying them off of eBay in America and then shipping them over to Malawi. The guy selling them on eBay realized, these people are buying a lot of eye-openers, and I just bought these, hoping someone would do something cool with them. What are they doing with them? He found out, and he donated 2,000 of them to Baobab, which is awesome. So at their offices, they have a hardware shop. Where they, put a new motherboard in the eye-openers, they install the touch screens and everything like that. And this is just one of the developer workstations that has one of the eye-openers in the middle and two of their computers where they're doing development on it. So they can actually use the tablet right there. I mentioned that you need some kind of connectivity. So what they did was they set up a wireless mesh network. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. and I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but it's basically it's an ad hoc network that you do routing by connecting over nodes, and the good part about this, and the reason why they went with it, is that it's self-healing. If one of the nodes is down, you can just skip right over it, which is great, because that happens a lot. Like I said, the power goes out a lot. It's sporadic, so that works really well. They actually even put up their own towers in there. You also need power. So the setup that they have at each clinic is kind of analogous to how the Toyota Prius works, if any of you are familiar with that car. So when they have power, they are charging the batteries, and when the power goes out, they can just suck the power right out of the batteries. And the batteries are buried at each clinic, so it works pretty well. So now that you have all of that kind of infrastructure worked out, which was no small feat, of course, you're going to need some application running on those things. And so what they went with was Ubuntu Linux, Ruby on Rails, MySQL, and then they developed a custom systems monitoring library, which was also written in Ruby. And the application is called BART, not to be confused with your transportation thing here. It's a baobab antiretroviral treatment. It uses a pretty complicated data model that I alluded to before. It's called OpenMRS. The templating, they're using ERB. Most of the application is AJAX, and it has a reporting component and has a testing suite in RSpec. OpenMRS is a global committee that is dedicated to trying to come up with a standard way of saving patient data and treatment, diagnoses, and prescriptions. So they decided, there's a few of them out there, of course, but OpenMRS seems to have the most support, so they decided to go with it. Despite the fact that the data model, and I don't know that you're going to be able to read this, but the data model looks like that. Yeah. So you definitely can't read it, but I wanted you to see the scale of it, because it's huge. The fact that they chose Ruby on Rails I thought was pretty interesting, because the table names, most of the table names are singular. Some of them are plural. Not really sure why. There's a lot of composite keys going on in there. However, those things are pretty easily overcome in doing a Rails application, and they found ways around it, and it turned out to be a lot easier to develop it in Rails. So just a quick overview of what this application does. And at the end on my last slide, I don't think I'm going to be able to play it with the time allotted, but there is a video of somebody actually using this application. So if any of you are interested, you can see it. But I wanted to give like a brief overview of the main components of the app. There's the registration component, encounters, observations, and prescriptions. I'm going to go into what those mean. So registration is when someone comes to the clinic, they're new, you have to get in their data. You generate a national ID barcode. I thought that was pretty cool, because this is a government program, everyone having a health passport and a national ID, but Baobab is actually able to print them. I can't remember how many they printed, but it was a pretty significant number. It was over, I think it was like over 100,000 ID codes that they had printed. You can also scan an existing barcode and read in that patient. Encounters. An encounter is any kind of interaction you have with the patient. It's whether the patient's filling out a form, it's whether they're coming in for a drug refill, it's whether they're getting a prescription. Observations are diagnoses. You can see, like, you would record something like, how is the disease progressing, how are they responding to treatment, patient vitals, like, is their weight and height, like, on average, like, is it good, patient compliance, which means, like, are they taking all of their prescribed medication? And this is all handled in the Ruby on Rails application, which is pretty cool. How are they progressing on their drug regimen? Prescriptions. Prescriptions are, you think they're pretty straightforward, but in sub-Saharan Africa they're not, because drugs are very expensive. These kinds of drugs are very expensive no matter where you live, but when you're making, I don't even know, like $2 maybe a day, like, you're not going to be able to afford a pill that costs $100, right? So there's all sorts of programs, right, to get around that. However, these pills are still, they're constantly being developed. They have various different ingredients. They're not always available. So one of the things the application does is figures out what is our drug inventory like now, if we don't have something to make this one formula, what do we have that we can mix together? And so all of that kind of logic is handled in the application as well. Well, so that's all awesome. So that's it, right? They're done? No, not at all. They have a lot of work to do still on the prescription model. It's a very complicated thing, and it's still under development. They're working on getting the code refactored for greater reliability and maintainability. Just as a quick side note, when I got there, they had a lot of tests written in our spec. They were fighting on so many different fronts, though, and I don't know if everyone has done this at some point in their life as a developer, but you end up having some failing tests every so often, maybe. So I got there, and the first thing I did trying to get this application set up was, break spec, and came up with, I won't mention the number, but a lot of failing specs. And when it's on data when it's a spec that says, patient deaths should be recorded, and you're sitting there at a hospital, you're like, whoa, okay, this is not just some my Ajax login screen didn't show. This is a little more serious. So they do need some refactoring done on the app and some more test coverage and maintainability. Oops, sorry. So as I mentioned, they presented at RailsConf EU in Berlin. That was great. Everyone wanted to contribute. All of a sudden, there were all these groups coming up, but there was really no response. And that was because they were not ready. They were not really set up to have people around the world come in and contribute, although they really wanted to, right? They had all of these Ruby rock stars, many names you guys all know. Some of you are here wanting to contribute, but there was no public repo. They were using SVN, and the SVN server was in Malawi. As I've already mentioned, the internet access was spotty. It was almost impossible to do a checkout from America, Europe, anywhere. Doing a simple SVN up would take about half an hour. There was a question of patient data security. Up until that point, the only people working on this application were at the hospital. So they had to go through the code and make sure no sensitive data was being captured in there. That their test fixtures were all fake people and stuff like that. And also, while all that was going on, while they were trying to get to a point where people could contribute, they were also trying to develop the application and dealing with other infrastructure problems. So they were pretty busy. So what happened? What were they able to do? Well, they moved to Git. They had been talking about doing it for a while, and no one there had ever used Git, but they took a weekend and they just went ahead and converted over to Git. They were on Gitosis at first, and then they moved over to GitHub, which was instrumental in allowing people to contribute around the world. So these are the tools that they've been using to really allow people to contribute. As I already mentioned, GitHub, and I really just want to say again how much GitHub has really helped with this. It's really easy to use. It allows you, well, you probably have all used GitHub, right? So all of a sudden they went from having this server with their code repo totally inaccessible to anyone. Now you can go and fork it. You can fix one of their specs maybe. You can add a feature. You can do whatever you want, and it's all really fast. It's great. They all hang out on IRC, the Malawian developers. If you're on Freenode, pound Baobab. They use Twitter integration. Well, they all have their own Twitter accounts, but they also use the Twitter integration with GitHub so you can follow what their progress is, and all of the employees have a blog as well. So this is their GitHub page, and as you can see, there's active development. They're adding people to the repo all the time. This is their Twitter feed of their code commits and stuff. So what are the benefits of using this application? What has happened? Well, more people are seeing doctors and getting treated, which is great. Previously, as I already mentioned, that registration form for new patients, once they got up to the front of the line, would take about 15 minutes. Using this, it takes less than a minute to register a new patient using this Rails application. Returning patients, when they come in, it's like less than 10 seconds for them to get through the intake process, which is great. The application constraints with data validation and workflow guidance have really revolutionized how patients are seen. There are far less errors, recording patient data. Depending on what kind of data you enter about a patient, if the person's a woman, then the next question might be, is this person pregnant? Stuff that normally you would have to be shuffling papers around, like, oh, this is a guy, we don't need to ask that, so we throw the paper over. It's all way more streamlined. It has a really easy to use interface as well, which means more people can help. And this is a really great story, and I love that this guy's name is Jem. It is actually his name. So at first he was a janitor in one of the clinics in the children's pediatric ward. He swept the floors and cleaned up the messes and stuff. And at first the BART, oops, sorry. Sorry about that. There we go. So at first the hardware and everything was only supposed to be used by the nurses, but nurses take breaks, doctors take breaks, and he was there and he saw like people were waiting, and he looked at this eye opener thing and was like, I think I could do that. And so he started registering the patients, and now he actually heads up the patient intake there, and he's probably registered over 200,000 people. So the data collection is enabling extensive reporting. Baobab is submitting reports to the World Health Organization, National Institutes of Health, the Malawian government, and that is enabling these agencies and agencies that use data that the other agencies are publishing to figure out where is it best to focus our research and funding and make policy decisions. It's also enabling people to make comparative observations, One of the other parts of the application is showing what are the average heights and weights for people of this certain age and at this stage in the development of the disease. So none of that was possible before they created this application. So all of that, in conclusion, means this experiment, which was a pretty big experiment. I mean, Ruby on Rails, when they started using it, was really, really new. It still is pretty new. And no one was using it in Malawi. But they were a success. They were not doing electronic stuff before. They're doing it now. This has proven that it is possible to do something for not even that much money. Like the eye openers were all donated. It was a lot of effort on the part of the people involved, but it's possible to do it in the developing world, and it's better than the typical setup of the paper trail, right? And you can accomplish it using new technology. The local impact, it fosters and creates a local developer community where there was none before. It's inspiring kids there to get into coding. Some of the developers at Baobab have started tutoring people who have heard about this Ruby thing, and they were like, what is Ruby and how do we get into it? So they're starting to learn it. But why did they pick it in the first place? Well, Ruby has a really great community, and one of the things I always thought was great about the Ruby community is that there's typically a pretty common consensus on what the best practices are. You should write tests for your code, all this sort of best practices, right? This community, I think, in particular, is pretty active in contributing to open source software. The information on how to go from nothing to having a full application is pretty easily accessible. I remember when I was starting out, I don't think he's here, but Coda Hale had a blog post that lots of people used, right, to figure out how do I set up Mongrel and all of this stuff to get a Rails app going. And it would be pretty easy to find one page. And when it takes forever to download anything, it's awesome to just have it all right there. There's also great interactive tutorials like PeepCode. And I want to say something about PeepCode because I was a little surprised when the guys there were talking about it when I showed up, that they love PeepCode. That's how they learned RSpec. But unfortunately, it took, I don't know, maybe a week to download a single PeepCode episode. And sometimes they'd have to try it several times, so it would be a month, and then they'd finally watch it and stuff. So I just want to thank Jeffrey Grossenbach if he's here. Jeffrey put all of his PeepCodes on a DVD and shipped it over to Malawi, which is awesome. And the guys love it. This is kind of like preaching to the choir, I guess, but why they picked Ruby, it's elegant, readable, it's easier to learn offline than other languages. There are lots of gems and plugins and stuff that you can use, but you don't have to go through, countless like Java libraries and APIs and whatever to figure out like how to get something pretty basic done. It comes with the documentation. You could just do RI on something in your terminal, and boom, you have your docs. Active record is what they're using, and it helps make manipulating complex data models easier. And they do quite a bit of executing SQL for the more complex stuff, like dealing with views and stuff. Technology in the developing world, and I realize I'm kind of running out of time, but is, as I already said, there's power outages, the internet access is spotty, slow, the knowledge base is small, there's little to no advanced training going on. In fact, this was Malawi's version of Peep Code. This is the best I could find for computer training, and I don't know if you guys can all read that, but under computer lessons it says, we are computer training experts in Microsoft products like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. So not much going on with the more advanced, I guess, computing topics like web application development and hardware and stuff. So all of this is possible because of the innovation that the people of Malawi are doing, and that is possible because there is an urgent need for solutions. It's not that you can waste a lot of time, debating which is the right thing to do. Like, people are dying, so you need to pick something and go with it. And I think they made the right decision in the software and hardware decisions that they made. There is no existing infrastructure to deal with. You might as well start with the latest, greatest thing, right? If you don't have to, incorporate some like COBOL or something like that. Let's see. So, yes, this is one of my favorite pictures from my entire time in Africa. That is Jacqui Mumba. He is one of the lead developers of Baobab. And he and I share a common love of Vim. And Vim, I guess, is kind of like Ajax here, is a cleanser. And I was quite surprised to find it there, in case you couldn't really see it. So Vim cleans to a sparkle, and one of my colleagues at HashRocket, actually, Tim Pope, is quite fond of this picture. And this is just a picture of me and Jeff, and that is my friend Jennifer Linder, who's also a Ruby programmer in New York, who came with me. They're not so much different than us. This is the wall at Baobab. That is a XKCD comic. I believe it's the Pseudo Make Me a Sandwich comic. That is a pretty funny picture of Bill Gates with a quote about how much he loves Linux. Right, and before I forget, yes, shout-outs. The developers at Baobab are awesome, and they are all available on GitHub, and the links to that are at the end of the slide. Jacqui Mumba, Mwanta Bonali, Jeff Rafter, Mike McKay, and Jerry Douglas. And I really have to thank Wilson Bilkovich for all of his work that he has done on this application. It's been invaluable. And, and I just wanted to thank Josh Susser again for asking me to speak here, and NYCRB for helping me rehearse this. So, thank you. Awesome. Are there any questions? Yes.
You had a video if you have time for it.
We can show the video over the lunch break.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we can show the video. And I also have a video interview with Jacqui that I was hoping to get to, but I kind of talked too much. Sorry. Yeah.
The mesh networking for the internet and stuff. Can you use is it cooperative and interactive with OLPC? Because I know the OLPC is being deployed around the developed world, and they have mesh network like that, sharing the connections.
As far as I know, they're not right now, and it's local to Malawi. Their network that they're using, and they're primarily using it just to connect all of the different clinics to each other. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Between people on a site, like a local area, like a Wi-Fi network.
No.
Okay.
Now, it's like an infrastructure mesh, not a local laptop to laptop.
Okay.
Yeah, do you have?
I'm curious how widely it's deployed. I mean, of the 280 doctors you said there in the country, how many of them are using this app?
I think about 265 of them. Yeah. And right now it's being used in Malawi, but they're planning on releasing it in other third world countries as well. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Yes. Sorry, I'm nervous. Yeah.
How is Valve involved in education and prevention?
How are they, what?
How are they involved with education and prevention aid?
Well, they're involved in, how is Baobab involved in prevention and treatment of, and education of AIDS? Well, Baobab's main focus is in enabling doctors and clinics to deal with patients and treat them. So that they're not so much involved in promoting AIDS education awareness. That's really done by other groups in Malawi. Was there anyone else? Yeah.
The engineers who are working in Africa, do you know how they were educated, how they came to end up with Ruby and web knowledge?
Sure. The question was, how did the engineers who are based in Malawi, who have lived in Malawi their whole lives, get up to speed on Rails? What is their training? Some of the people who are now programming on the project had no programming experience whatsoever and learned on the job. Others had some experience in, I think, .NET maybe, or VB script, and they learned Ruby through, as I said, peep code screencasts and blog posts when they could find them. Yeah. And that's actually, thank you for asking me that, because that is one of the biggest contributions any of us could make. We all have, depending on where we live, different user groups and people that we talk to all the time about code and like what the latest thing is. These guys don't really have that. So one of the best contributions we can make is teaching them like what is the best practice for doing test-driven development, or why would you want to do iterative development cycles, how, like, even helping them with deployment strategies. So, yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's great. I think that's all we got time for. We're going to take a couple minutes and then let you get lunch, and then we can play the video during the lunch break. That sounds good? Is it your lunch?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.